I am so happy you could join me today, Michelle. Thank you for being here and spending this time and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Mitzi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you give us an idea, just a little snapshot about who you are right now in this moment? What do we need to know about Michelle?
Well, thank you for asking. First of all, I am in my early 50s. So I'm definitely in this midlife space and I wear a lot of hats. I'm a mom, a wife, I'm an executive in corporate America. I'm on the cusp of doing some real meaningful work myself, launching a podcast around living your extraordinary life. And we can talk about that in a bit. But I'm a daughter, a sister, an aunt to many, many beautiful nieces and one nephew. And I have a lot of friends. So I have a very good life. I'm living outside of Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. Quite frankly, this is probably one of the, I would say, most fulfilling parts of my life journey thus far. I'm in a really good place. I'm excited to be doing meaningful work, both in the corporate arena as well as some of my own projects and initiatives. And it's just a very soul fulfilling, life giving time.
Just the energy you put out with that description is inspiring me. That's
I'm
great.
glad to hear
You can
that.
tell when somebody's got a high vibe. I can't wait to hear how you got to that place because that's important. There's everything that's happened to you has made you the person you are today. And I love that area of Virginia, by the way. I haven't been there very much, but I visited an adorable little town. I think it might have been called Middle.
Middleburg.
Yeah,
Yes, Middleburg is probably a little bit under an hour from where I
okay.
am.
Such a
I
pretty
live
part of the country.
Yeah, it really is. It's really at the foothills before you get out into the Shenandoah Mountains. It's gorgeous and it's horse country. So I did not
Yes.
grow up here. I'm from New England originally. I grew up in Maine. So,
Okay.
but I love it. I've lived here for many, many, many years and it is now home.
Were you born in Maine?
I was
Okay.
born and raised in Maine. I
Maine is a pretty
am
big state. So can you tell us where or not, you don't have to give it all
Yeah,
away, but
no, I'm happy to tell you. I grew up in central Maine. I grew up in a very small town called Oakland, which is in the Belgrade Lakes region of the state. It's fairly rural. The town is very small. It still remains a very small town. It's a very small town feel. Everybody knows everybody for the most part. And I am very grateful. I'm still in touch with a lot of the people I went to high school with. Thanks to social media, right? We can all kind of stay in
yeah.
touch and hear what's going on in each other's lives. My parents grew up in central Maine and they were teen parents. So I'm the first of three. And it's kind of a miraculous story. But my mom was 16 and my dad was not quite 18. And they found out that they were having me. And my dad is the youngest of eight in a very big Irish family, and my mom is one of five right in the middle of a very French family. So it was a little bit like the Hatfield, what is it? The Hatfields and the Coys in the beginning, because I don't think my mother's mother was very pleased about the scenario. But everybody came together. My father graduated from high school in June of 1970. He turned 18 in late June. My parents were married in the end of July of that year. And I came along in late September of 1970. So it was definitively an interesting time, fairly volatile. He had babies raising babies, and I was the first of three. And so by the time my mom was 21, she had three children that were all toddlers and preschooler age. So it was a lot. Not that uncommon. I think, most of my friends' parents were probably in their early 20s when they started having kids, which still to me seems incredibly young, but it made for a fairly volatile start. My
Hmm.
parents are incredibly loving, but they were children. I have a 15-year-old now, and I think, good Lord, the idea of my child, and he's turning 16 in March, having a baby at that age, like he's a baby still. My parents did an incredible job, just a really incredible job staying together, staying united while they were still growing up. And my parents are still married 52 years later, which is
Wow.
pretty shocking given the divorce rate in the
Yeah.
US. And, it has not been easy for them, and nor was it easy for us growing up. But we all got through it, and they instilled on us a lot of values, hard work being one of them. And if I think through, kind of reflecting back on this, the major theme has really been this sort of battle between light and darkness.
Hmm.
And I say that because my very early years were fairly light. We lived with my grandparents initially while my parents were getting on their feet. My parents were studying. They were working. My dad was working two jobs. My mom was taking care of me. I was going with her to night school while she got her GED because she was still in high school when I came along. But it felt light. I was little, it was light. My grandparents were incredibly supportive and helpful, and it felt easy. But that sort of weared off pretty quickly. I think
Ooh.
once I was of an age, probably around 6 or 7, started to be very aware of
Mhm.
the fact that my parents were very young. Money was very tight. We were in a working class family in a small town where there wasn't a great deal of wealth, to be honest, or professionals. A lot of the folks worked in working class jobs in mills or what have you, my father being one of them. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom in those early years. So there was not a lot of money. I don't think they had the wherewithal in those days to know that there were some conversations that probably weren't best to be had in front of
Mm.
younger ears. So as the oldest in the family, I think I heard a lot of the struggle of setting up a home and having children and what that meant. And it was a very heavy feeling for me. I remember
Wow.
just feeling very responsible for having to help my parents.
Huh.
Not that they asked me to help with my siblings, nor do I know that they would see that I helped, but the sense of they had sacrificed a lot because they were young when they had us. And I felt maybe just the way my DNA is wired that I owed them a lot in return. And it felt heavy. It
Even
felt
from a
like
young so you felt that even at a young age?
very young. So I learned very quickly if I brought home straight A's, my parents were really happy and
Mm.
proud. So I became the kid that came home with the stars, and I had to, get all the attention at school so that I could come home to show my parents, like, look what I did for you.
Mhm.
And that was, I didn't know then how much it would influence things to come, but it made them happy. So it made me happy.
Mhm.
And so we'd have these conversations. I think my parents, because they weren't able to go to college themselves at that point in time, my dad did go to college later. So that's an
Aw.
interesting story. After we all went, we
Aw.
made sure he did. My very, very early on, probably from kindergarten on, my dad would say, education is your way ahead, and you're not going to have a safety net. We're working class. You have siblings behind you, and you're the first. And if you do well in school, then they'll do well in school. They'll see you as an
Mm.
example. You need to pave the way. And I took that responsibility very seriously. I saw my parents working hard. I saw the sacrifices they made. And I thought that that was my responsibility, that I needed to do that. And so learning, while I enjoyed it, was also, it became very stressful for me. I didn't want to struggle, and I sometimes did struggle with things, but I always did well. So even if it was going to cost me my well-being, or as I was going to get sick because I stayed up late, even really, really young, it was so important to me to have the highest grades possible, because I thought that that was the way I was going to be able to go to college, even if I didn't know what that meant, because no one had gone before me. And I knew that that's what my parents wanted. And that was going to put our family on a different course.
Hmm.
And that made sense, that that was going to be our way out of what was perceived as difficult times. And we had tightened the hatchet. I'd never known a time when we didn't. We didn't have a
Yeah.
lot, so we were all just, things had to stretch as far as they could, and I wanted to not have to experience that. I did have friends in school, and you start to see very early on, like, they have nicer clothes, or their
Mhm.
parents go on vacation, or they can afford to go to the movies on the weekends. And I did occasionally, but it was something that would stretch my family to do a lot of those things. And I watched my parents, like when I showed interest in music, my mom found a way to pay for me to have guitar lessons.
Mm.
And I took that very, very seriously. Like, they are sacrificing money that's for the family for me. So I need to do very well. So there was just a sense of heaviness as I was really young, that I had to do this rather than I want to do these
Mhm.
things. And so I do think it marks, it's not like I didn't have fun or didn't enjoy myself. I did, but it was with this sense of deep responsibility. And so achievement became the way of showing my parents I love them, right?
Wow.
Like
Yeah.
I got A's, I'm
Mhm.
in the top of my class. And then, I had a little sister and a little brother behind me, and they got right in line. And so my parents were like, see, this is good. You're paving the way for your siblings. And I took that role as firstborn ultra seriously.
I mean, what you're describing is typical of a firstborn child, except the extra burden of that your parents kind of were almost like you were taking their role that they were suddenly not able to fulfill.
Yeah, I mean, I think in part, but I also think my parents, they were doing the best they could with what they had. And their sense was if we cheerlead her on to greatness,
Mhm.
then she'll have a better life than we had. And that's
Yeah.
what we want for our children, right? We
Yeah.
always want our children to do better than we did, whatever that means.
Right.
And I think for them, being very young, it became a very materialistic thing. We didn't have
Okay.
a lot. And so I should look for things and to do things that would enable me to be able to travel, have a
Okay.
nicer home, buy nice clothes, buy things, and I think that was very representative of having young parents that didn't have the wherewithal to look back and say, well, maybe those things don't always make you happy, right? But that became a very big pursuit very, very early on. I wanted to go to college. I had no idea really what I wanted to study, but my options were, well, you're going to go to medical school or law school.
Ah.
Because this my parents knew, right?
Yeah.
That's back then, those seemed like really viable options, and people did well if they went into those professions. And I didn't have the ability within me yet to say, I don't think either of those make sense for me. I didn't know that there was an option to say no, quite frankly.
Mm.
So I knew my parents couldn't afford to pay for college. So I worked really, really hard. I was blessed that one of the things I definitively got from my parents was this resilience and persistence.
Mm.
And they were the same way with what they had, with where they were. They worked really hard. I think a
Mm.
lot of people who attended that wedding back in July of 1970 were like skeptical that this would even last. And I think they probably thought this poor child that's coming. And my parents were out to prove them all wrong.
Mm.
So I think partly out of spite, and they were young and they had the energy to do it. They worked incredibly hard. They had nothing to start, and they built a really good life. Over time, we had a comfortable life. The beginning was really hard, but it got much more comfortable. And my parents were able to kind of push the boundaries of what they had experienced to allow us to see even bigger horizons. So while they might not have traveled, they made sure that when I started to show an interest, even the smallest things. I had an aunt that lived in Texas, my dad's sister, who I was very close to, and I was about 14. I just got out of 8th grade, and I said, I want to spend the summer. I want to fly across the country and go visit my aunt. And my parents, no one had ever expressed any interest in leaving home. And they're like, all right, let's figure out how to make it happen. And so that began, like, for me, this deep desire to get out of my small town and experience the world. And they took a leap of faith and put me on a plane in Boston, like drove me all the way to Boston, put me on a plane and let me cross the country on my own, back pre-cell phone. And I went and had this fabulous experience with my aunt and uncle and my cousin, traveling around the deep south, Texas and Louisiana and all over that summer. And then, it really sparked a deep, long, lifelong interest in traveling.
Mm.
I was a junior in high school, and there was an exchange student. I think the very first exchange student, at least that I had ever known in my town. And she was living with another family. She was in my class, though. And she was from Spain. I'd never been to Spain. No one I knew had ever been to Spain. No one I knew had ever been outside of Maine, other than my trip to Texas. And so she and I met, and I was just so curious about her. She ended up coming home with me after school on a Friday, spent the weekend, spent the night, and at the end of the weekend asked very sincerely, can I come live with you? And we were just all sort of taken back, like, but don't you have a host family? And we were starting to realize, like, it really wasn't a good fit for
Mm.
her. We knew the family, they're a very good family, but it wasn't a good fit. And, we were sort of between a rock and a hard place. These are people we knew. But my mom spoke with the house mom and said, look, if it's helpful and if it makes sense, we're willing to do it. And we had very little, but we all sort of bunked in, and my parents put in another bed in my bedroom, and I shared a bedroom with this exchange student from Spain. I can't even believe my parents said yes to this after one weekend, but I think they saw that I bonded with this woman. Her name was Esther. And for anybody from my high school that's eventually listening to this podcast, they're all going to remember her with this big mane of hair. And she walked into our school and sort of put us all into a state of shock. And it changed my life because that one experience, then her parents were so grateful because she hadn't been really feeling happy and that she was really fitting in until she came to live with us,
Mm.
that they came over to visit and check on her and make sure she was doing okay. And they were so grateful that we had bonded and my parents were taking good care of her, that they invited me to Spain to spend the summer. And so that was my very first trip out of the country, and it wouldn't be my last. You know, it
Oh.
just opened up a whole new world for me. And this family saying, "We're so grateful. We would love for Michelle to come and spend the summer with us." And they did everything to make sure that I saw as much of Spain as I could. It was like a kid in a candy store. They were much more affluent. I had never known anybody who had maids in their home, live-in staff, or any of this. And it was a very different culture because it was a very common thing actually in Spain at the time, just not here in the States. And just the whole experience from the type of shopping malls and the oldness of Madrid, and then flying to the south of Spain. They took me to North Africa. I mean, it opened a completely new world for me. And I came back and from that experience going into my senior year of high school and said, I'm going to get a scholarship to go to college. I'd never studied Spanish because where I lived in the US, they didn't offer Spanish yet. It wasn't a language on the rise. We lived close to Canada, so people learned French.
Mm.
Most of our families had some grandmother or grandfather who still spoke some degree of French because a lot of them were from Canada, and English. And I studied Latin for 4 years and ancient Greek because I thought I was going to go to law school. That made the most
Oh.
sense. So I came back from that and said, I want to learn Spanish because I was so enamored with what I had experienced that I wanted to go back. And so I came back. I applied to college. I was very blessed that my dad was willing to take me all over the Northeast and some places beyond Maine to places he had never gone to before because they said, I want to check out this college and I want to check out that college and I want to check out this college. And that was our first foray. Like no one could really guide me because no one had done it before, but we went all over looking. I knew for me, it needed to be a small college because I wasn't ready for, I grew up in a tiny little town, wasn't ready for a D1 state school experience. I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew that, 10,000 students felt overwhelming to me. So I ended up, after exploring a whole host of really D3 schools, private liberal arts colleges, I ended up getting accepted into several, but one that I was really happy with that happened to be in my home state of Maine. And I think everyone was like, what? You're going to Colby? So I went to Colby College. It was really kind of unexpected because I had started to travel and I had the travel bug. But what people didn't know is that Colby had probably the most robust junior year abroad programs of any liberal arts college in the country. And we had students coming in from all over to go through Colby's junior year abroad. And I knew that. I had figured that out. I had done the background research. And so kids from Georgetown, where I would later go to grad school, all applied to go to Colby's junior year abroad programs. And that brought me back to Spain. And I got into Colby. I was incredibly blessed because they saw me, I think, coming from rural Maine, even though it was based in Maine. Not a lot of students from Maine went to Colby. It wasn't really in anybody's affordability category back then. So you had kids from affluent families in Massachusetts predominantly, a lot from California, Pennsylvania, you name it, New Jersey, but not a lot of people from Maine could afford to send their kids there. And I was given a merit scholarship. And so it paved the way for me to be able to go. I was also given on campus job to go with my financial aid package. It just completely changed my experience in life to that date
Mm.
because I started off working in the business department. It was great to start there, but I knew that really wasn't interesting. they ended up putting me in the language arts department. And so I was overseeing the putting together of the foreign exchange programs for all those junior year abroad students that I
Wow.
aspired to go on. So I was working on making sure that their passports and their visas and their host families and all of that, along with the professors that were going to go and stay with them for the year, were in order and lined up. So it gave me insight into what was going to happen for me. I didn't know that they were going to let me go because I hadn't studied Spanish. So I walked in as a freshman going, "Hi, I've never studied Spanish, but I have 4 years of Latin and I have ancient Greek, and I want to be a Spanish major." And they were like, "That's sweet." And they were just like, "That's not going to happen." They were honest with me. They said, "Well, that's very ambitious, but the students that are going to be Spanish majors and go on these year abroad programs have been studying it since middle school, and you don't have that. So they're at least 6 years ahead of you." And I said, "I don't care. That's what I want to do. I went to Spain and now I have the bug and I want to go back and I'm going to be fluent when I go." And I was pretty naive about it, but I was really determined. And I really, I credit my parents because I remember going, they said no. And I was really disappointed. And both of them are like, "And you're just going to accept that?" And I think back, like how interesting my parents didn't just say, "Oh, well, find
Mhm.
something else." They were like, "Is that what you want?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be a double major. I'm going to do political science because I was still on the I'm going to go to law school, but I'm also going to be a Spanish major." And they said, "Well, then tell them that you want to take the 101 course, like an entry level student, and ace it.
Mhm.
You know how to do that." And so I did. And I did. And so, at the end of my freshman year, they give out awards to the top performing students. It's called the Book Prize Award. And I got it for the freshman class. That included all the other students that were well above 101 that had been
Yeah.
studying for 6 years. And that kind of showed me like, if you want something and you really aligned with it,
Mhm.
it brought me joy. Other
Mhm.
people I know that if it wasn't, they're like, "I have to study this language and it's hard, it doesn't feel right." For me, it was like the key to the hidden treasure. If I could
Mm.
learn this language, I could go back to that world I had experienced, but I wouldn't be a tourist. I could
Mm.
participate in life. I could be part of it. And so that was really exciting for me. And so I busted my tail. I was on a path then. I think at the end of my
Mm.
freshman year, the head of the department came and said, "Okay, we get it. You're serious
Mhm.
and we're going to help you." And so that sort of paved the way for them realizing, we're going to load you down. We're going to load you up with a lot of demanding courses. It's going to be sink or swim
Mm.
before we say yes to you going on a year abroad where you have to be fluent,
Yeah.
because your classes are, I was going to be in the law school. And
Oh,
so it
wow.
was like, if it was going to transfer back and count as credit back at Colby for me, I had to have something equivalent to political science. I didn't have political science then in Spain. It was more, I was studying constitutional law of Spain. And they're like, "You can't do this faking it. You have to know this language." So I studied year round. I went to Mexico. Colby has a program. So as a sophomore, I went for an intensive 6-week program during what would have been January break for us between the fall and spring semesters. And I just threw myself in head first. I didn't speak any English. I had broken Spanish speaking with my host family as best I could, probably sounding like a cave person, but I was determined to like figure it out. And so that was the beginning. Now, I will say that the interesting part, a lot of my experience through college, I spent a year plus overseas. I ended up in Salamanca, Spain. And Salamanca, for those who don't know, is the third oldest university in Europe.
Mm.
And so I was in this university that was founded in like at the 1200s, medieval times at best, and it draws students from all over the world. It is a university town. It is phenomenally beautiful. It's like the
Mhm.
golden city. You leave Madrid, it's very flat. Once you get outside of Madrid and you take the train into Salamanca, and then out of nowhere springs this glorious golden stone fortress of a city with the spires of all the cathedrals and the churches and the universities. It's just breathtaking. And I remember going, I feel like I'm in a fairy tale. I've just arrived and I was 19 years old and threw myself into it. And to this day, some of the people that I met there are my closest friends.
Mm.
We were the same age. I met this one woman who was also at the university. She was studying to be a journalist, from Salamanca originally. She was in my wedding,
Oh, wow.
eventually once, and I got married much later. So like we stayed in touch. We have children. We hadn't been in touch for a little while. We both had this need to call each other to announce later on in life when we both were pregnant with our sons the same year. Like, what is
Mhm.
the coincidence
Yeah.
having not spoken to each other? So there's this schismic
Yeah.
experience, and that really just sparked this interest in international global cultures. And I will say it's a theme that's carried through my life even now. We have, I would say, a lifestyle that involves and is centered around travel.
Mm.
We take it very seriously as a family. We didn't go too much when my son was really small, but right about kindergarten, we started saying, okay, he's ready. And we started going international. We had smaller trips initially until he was ready to go really experience Europe and South America, and we've taken him all over. And now we have a sophomore in high school who's incredibly worldly, loves to experience new cultures and new food, is studying Spanish himself. We'll get to this part of the story, but I am married to a Peruvian. And so it all comes full circle.
Wow. So
But
what I just have to ask you because it feels like you've had so much serendipity. It's just things have just aligned for you. And
the
so
funny
what do you
thing,
why do you think that is?
I think if you look back, most of us, if we're honest with ourselves about the themes of our lives, and I feel very strongly about this, there are periods of light and there are periods of darkness. And even in the periods of darkness, because I would say everything that I just shared with you was happening in the backdrop of that, I was struggling with a lot of issues. So I was experiencing a lot of phenomenal things, and a lot of it was positive, but I was also struggling with depression,
Can
and
you
I didn't
talk
know
about
it.
that a little? Because that's what I feel like sometimes people, when they tell their stories, they do, it seems like everything is really rosy. So how,
Far from it.
yeah,
Far
so
from it. Oh, I think, look, I'll get into a lot more detail. I think the idea is for much of my life, and particularly early on, I felt it was my job to assert independence, forge a path, and that creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of heaviness.
mm,
And it also, for me, brought me to a very low vibration because the anxiety fuels fear. And when you operate from a place of fear, even when you're trying to do big things or great things or achieve things that are important to you, when it comes from because you're in a fear based state, your ego plays an incredibly important role in your life. It sort of overtakes your life and you don't even realize it. You just know you don't feel good and you're stressed and you get frustrated more easily. And for me, it was perpetual anxiety that the other shoe is going to drop at any time, that the carpet was going to get pulled out from underneath me. And it started, again, early. My parents worked very, very hard. Ends didn't always meet. I remember very vividly a time where the mill that my dad worked at, I was probably 10 at the time, it went on strike. And that was the first time I ever worried if we'd have food to eat. And I remember going, my mom got in the car, put the three of us in the car, and went to the town hall. I'm going to get weepy saying this out loud, but went to the town hall and had to ask for money to buy groceries because my dad was a union worker and they weren't allowed to crossed the line. And so there was no money coming in. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I don't think I've ever eaten so many bologna sandwiches in my life, nor did I ever again after that summer, because it reminded me of how hard and difficult that summer was. And it was difficult to watch my mom. And, when you're 10, you can't really do anything about it. It just feels scary. I just remember getting into bed at night going, are we gonna eat tomorrow? And
mm,
it was tight. I remember like we picked up for people who were union workers, they had food pickups. And I'd never
mm.
known what that was. My parents had never been on welfare or anything like that. But it was the first time that I saw what that meant. And we went and picked up like blocks of cheese and
Mhm.
powdered milk. And I remember thinking, oh no, like what's happening? And then for me, and I know for my mom and dad, it was devastating. I remember sitting in the car and all I could think of, from my very young ego state of 10 was, I hope nobody I know sees us here. How would they know what we were doing there?
Right,
They
right.
wouldn't. But I thought everyone's going to know that we're poor. And
Yeah.
it was a hard time. It wasn't that we were poor. I've realized now in my adulthood, there were people with a lot less than what we had. But from the eyes of a 10-year-old, it was pretty scary. And so that anxiety fueled a lot of heaviness. And
Hmm.
I think it became when books became a refuge for me. I'm grateful that my parents still found a way to make sure through the library or other means we had books, and I always was, my nose is in a book constantly, and it was my escape. I read a
Mm.
lot. The good thing of that was it really increased my vocabulary and it increased
Yeah.
my desire to travel and see new things, and
Wow.
it put me in a good position to go to college because I did very
Hmm.
well in college entrance exams, and I was a budding writer. I wanted to write, and everyone knows if you want to become a writer, you need to read.
Yes.
You read and read and read. My parents wouldn't have known that,
Wow.
but they allowed for me to have access. So I just credit them because it was really
Mm.
incredibly tough. And, it wasn't only tough for us, it was really tough for them
Yeah.
because I think they grew up in working class. So they were kind of accustomed to it, but it's not what they wanted. It wasn't what they
Hmm.
aspired to. And they certainly didn't want their kids to go through the ringer. And so I think, they did everything to keep us positive. And I remember we borrowed my grandfather's Oldsmobile. We drove that summer. It was a surprise. We didn't know where we were being taken. I felt like we're, big mystery trip we were going on. We all piled into my grandfather's Oldsmobile that we had borrowed, my siblings and I in the back seat trying to sleep because my parents decided that it would make more sense to travel with little kids at night than day. They drove all the way to Orlando, Florida.
From Maine.
If the world is going to come to an end and it's going to be really rough, we are going to budget our way through Disney, and these kids are going to experience something fun before the proverbial, what, hits the fan,
Yeah.
and it's going to be rough. And so we spent 3 weeks on the road. We didn't even know that we were doing it in a budget way, but staying at very low end hotels, eating the $1.99 all you can eat breakfast buffet, having lunch in the hotel with like Wonder Bread and bologna sandwiches and mustard. But my parents got us to Disney World, and we experienced Disney World, and we went to Tampa and went to Busch Gardens, and we did all the theme parks right at a time when we really needed some light in our
Hmm.
life and some levity because things were going to get really heavy, and we were going to experience a lot of uncertainty. And so they had the wherewithal at, gosh, I was 10, so that would have made my mother 26 and
Wow.
my dad 28.
Wow.
I can tell you at 26 and 28, I was in a very different state of mind as a single
Yes.
person in the city. But they were able to do that for us and show us that, yeah, things are going to get tight and things are going to be tough, but we're going to try to have some fun. And so we did that, and it made
Wow.
things so much better because we had these memories to look back on as we were going through the dark times.
Hmm.
But it also
Wow.
underscored for me, I was able to kind of put the heaviness on hold
Yeah.
for a good 3 weeks, and we had a really fun start to our summer. We were typical kids. We played baseball. So I was in farm league baseball in the summer, and I did all that kind of stuff. And it was a light summer. And I remember going, this is probably the most fun I've ever experienced. But when we went back into school in the fall, I really started reaching deeper and harder for achievement. That really became the theme. And so
Mm.
that whole pervasive battle between light and dark in my life, and that sort of underlying heaviness that was so much a part of my early years, kind of kicked into full gear. It was hard. I felt hard. It felt heavy. There wasn't that there weren't moments of levity and happiness, but there were moments. It wasn't that I was in a state of well being and happiness. I was really under a lot of stress and a lot of self induced pressure based
Hmm.
on how I had perceived my situation.
Yeah.
And I thought it was my job to do well, to take my family to the next level. And I don't know, like I think a lot of firstborns, like you said, feel
Mhm.
that way. But I had I think the added burden of, I wanted to know what it was like to not worry about coupon cutting or buying discount clothes or getting hand-me-downs. I didn't want to have to think about that. I wanted to be able to experience more. So I worked really, really hard. I was able to go forward and achieve a lot. I won a lot of scholarships in my early years. I won a lot of academic recognition. I
Mhm.
was Phi Beta Kappa in college. I graduated top 3 of my class in high school. I was in the top 5% of my college graduating class. I became a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholar right after getting out of college. I was recruited in a recession into a job when nobody had jobs coming out of college. I had a job before I graduated, coming in an offer to come to Washington, D.C. to work for a consulting firm. And so all of that external achievement was how I was sort of justifying the hard work. If the hard work makes sense because I'm going to achieve this, and this is going to bring us to a new place, not just me, but my family, and I'm going to break the cycle of poverty. And
Did
this is
your
how we're going to do it.
achievement help you with the anxiety and depression at all? Was it a coping mechanism in some way?
Interesting that you asked me that, because I had a high school teacher 30 years after the fact reach out to me on social media and say, I am so glad to see you doing well.
Hmm.
And remember asking him a personal message going, well, why wouldn't you think I was going to do well? And he said, you put so much pressure on yourself. We all collectively held our breath, worried that you were going to collapse, that
Oh.
you were on the brink of a nervous breakdown. And if I think about how I walked in the world then, I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. I probably wasn't a very happy person to be around, although I was grateful to be able to say I had some friends.
Yeah.
But all my friends were pretty much in the, I don't know if we called them honors classes back then, but it was like college track and the
Mhm.
higher academics. I was in the AP classes at the beginning and the advent of what was AP. And so there were smaller classes in, the high school setting. I studied to the point of exhaustion.
Did you have social time with your friends in high school?
I did, but they were all hardworking, studious people without maybe all of the backdrop of drama that was going on in my own little world. But they were more academically gifted or inclined. And so it probably came easier for some of them than it did for me. I worked really, really hard to get good grades. It didn't always come intuitively. English did. English was my favorite class. I wrote and wrote and wrote that, and probably world history and civics, but like math. And I will tell you, I'm very good friends with my math teacher from it's the same math teacher, 5th and 6th grade, as I had my freshman year of high school. And I recall, and I told her, I said, I struggled in those classes. And she said, you always got straight A's. I would stay up all night.
Mhm.
I would forego on family outings. My mom recalls this time where she said, we were outside raking leaves and you had a paper to write and a test to study for and a project that was due. And you just had all this stuff. And I remember you looking out the window and the tears coming down your face and when I came to say, what's wrong? You said, I can't come out and rake leaves. And she said, any other kid would have been like, I don't have to rake the leaves. She's like, but for you, it was levity and you felt the heaviness of all this work.
Mhm.
So I did. I had girlfriends and we went out, and it's not like I didn't. I went to every school dance, I did participate. I went to all of that. I wasn't popular enough probably to get invited to parties back then, but I went out with my friends, went to the
Mhm.
movies, we got together, went to the beach in the summers, we did
Mhm.
things. So I did have a group of people that loved me, accepted me, had me
Mhm.
in the fold. And, I did pretty good at hiding it with my peers. I fit in the sense that I was, young and cute, and I worked really hard. And a lot of the stuff that I was experiencing was behind the scenes. Like,
Mhm.
not a lot of people, particularly my peers, would have known exactly what was going on. Although
Mhm.
I suspect those that were intuitive probably realized that they knew I worked really hard.
Mhm.
Everybody, it
Mhm.
was a small school. So everyone knew those kids that were in the, academically challenging classes, and those that were the studiers, and those that were more the partiers. And
Mhm.
I always sort of was on that end of the spectrum.
So
But
yeah, and then but when you got into the experiences in college and you were traveling, do you feel like you had moved through some of that heaviness, or was it still there?
yeah, some of it. I think, look, peeling back the layers of all of that stuff that forms very early on with the mindsets and the belief systems that you sort of acquire. For me, it was you don't have a safety net. No one's going to be able to come save you, which
Mhm.
probably actually wasn't accurate. I think my parents definitively would have come to my
Yeah.
rescue if I had said I needed them, but I didn't want to burden them.
Mhm.
So feeling like you don't have a safety net is not a good feeling because you
Mhm.
feel like you're on your own. When I got to college, it was a little rough in the beginning because I had this incredibly big ego and chip on my shoulder of being from a family that was lower income.
Mhm.
I was there on merit, not because my parents could afford. And you would think as an adult, looking back, you're like, well, that's great. As a
Yeah.
kid, you just want to fit in. I didn't
Yeah.
have a car. My roommate had a car. I couldn't go on shopping sprees to Freeport and the outlet malls, but she was there every weekend. And she had a lightness about her that I desperately wanted. And I wish I could have been more like her. And no, I was in the library 24/7 for the time. And I would be up early in the morning and studying over and over and over again before class, in between class, after class, thinking about what step I needed to take next to kind of figure out my future. So, I joined and I applied for the student judiciary body thinking, well, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I should get experience in that kind of setting. And so I'll be a justice, on my student peer review committee. It was a great experience, but doesn't put you in the most popular light with your peers, right?
Yeah.
But I took it really seriously. It was
Mhm.
important for me. It was great on a resume. And I kept thinking what the next thing. So yeah, I went to parties in college. I had a lot of friends in college. Going to Spain was a godsend because honestly, they have exam periods twice a year. So it wasn't this ongoing paper, exam, test experience. I kind of got a mental break from all of it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as you were talking. It feels like you were always on from the time you were super little, just
Yeah,
always on, like
always on.
really high performance all the time.
And there were moments where I did have breakdowns in my teens. This is like pre-therapy years. So
Mhm.
certainly, even if I had access, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. In high school, I remember just saying to my mom, I feel so alone. I had people around me, but I felt
Mhm.
really lonely because I felt that I had to do things on my own. I felt like I had to show that I could be independent and pick myself up by the bootstraps, as us New Englanders like to say.
Mhm.
And what I ended up experiencing was this constant battle between spiritual awakening and independent. In my darkest days, I thought I was alone. And in my brightest days, I realized that my parents had actually instilled in me a faith that I didn't understand and I didn't know how to tap into when I was young. Sort of went to church and didn't really find that to be the spiritual experience that maybe others have had. I went out of more being a Irish French Catholic ethnicity, right? So you did
Mhm.
on Sundays, everyone went
Mhm.
to church.
Right.
So I didn't have that relationship with God that I would have later in life. I had those moments where my mom would say, have you prayed about it? And I remember thinking, I don't understand how praying is going to get all this work done. And it would
Yeah.
frustrate me because I
Yeah.
didn't really, the ignorance is bliss. There's a reason why there's a saying. There's a reason why that became a popular saying. I think the more time you spend in your head, the less happy you are.
That's true.
I mean,
Yes.
I think it is a unfortunate truth of the more, and I've always surrounded myself in this very academic, intellectual environment
Mhm.
without the grounding or the spiritual awakening to
Mhm.
balance it. And so
Mhm.
I'm by myself, I'm on my own. Those are moments of darkness. And that was
Mhm.
pervasive from
Mhm.
6 years old through 16. And at those moments, I remember thinking, I can't go on. I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. At 16, I am burnt out. I had in the third grade won this contest, and it was like how many different academic puzzles you could solve in a short amount of time. It was me and this other boy. that were kind of neck and neck for top place in the class. And your name was like on these little rockets they would put and they'd move you up the chart. And I was like, I'm going to win. Like the moon was at the top or something.
Hmm.
I'm going to the moon. And it was all math stuff. And I was terrible at math naturally, but I'd push and push and push and push and push. And you would accumulate these like little award bucks, if you will. And I had
Okay.
stuffed them in my pocket in my winter coat. And I remember going with my mom to the grocery store and had that winter coat. And I remember feeling them in my pocket inside this little plastic baggie that I had been accumulating them throughout the fall, going into winter break. And it was snowing and we were going into Kmart or something to run an errand, and they fell out of my pocket in the snow. I was devastated. I had a pocket full of these award dollars that weren't even real, that were paper, to prove my worth. And I
Mm.
had lost them all over the parking lot, and it was windy and it was snowing, and I knew precisely how many I had. And I just sat in the snow crying,
Oh my God.
going, the world's coming to an end. And I remember my poor mother going, what have we done? Trying to pick up as many as she could. But to me, it was like all lost. And I remember going back to school, and it was the week before break, and telling my teacher, I lost all of them. Sorry, I'm going to cry over something so
No,
silly.
you're allowed to cry. Absolutely.
I lost all of them. And she
Ugh.
said, how many did you have? And I told her, and I said, but how will you know that that's really how many I had? And she said, because I know you're telling me the truth, because I know you. So she gave me all the dollars back,
Ugh. It was like your self-worth,
tied up in these
had
little
gone, and then
words.
you had this beautiful teacher who said to you, "I know your self-worth. I know what you're worth
She
here."
gave me every single one and probably some extra that I didn't earn.
Oh, oh my
And
gosh. Wow.
and I won the prize. I got to bring it home to my mom. And it was my mother's like, oh my Lord, this giant spider plant that had been hanging in our classroom. And I brought it
Oh
home
my
for
gosh.
Christmas for my mom.
Oh, wow. That's a
And I remember
beautiful
that
story.
being
Oh
like
my God.
such an important moment, but it went back to the heaviness.
Yeah.
Here I was, I was probably 8 years old. Everything felt like it was melting in the snow,
That's a metaphor and a half
right?
right there. Yeah. Yeah.
So, look, part of it's growing and learning and pushing. And my mom had the wherewithal over time to say, you really need to format your faith. And I,
Mm.
being much more academically inclined, was like, what does she know? And as I got older, it was like religion and organized religion. I sort of had this natural rebellion, even though I was very dutifully going to mass and CCD all my upbringing. I was confirmed and everything. I did feel this pushback and anger.
Mm.
Like, that's great for you to say, but I've been all alone. Where's God? And I remember my mom, she was still really young and I was in college. My mom was in her early 30s when I entered college. And that was really when I started to open up and realize I wasn't alone and that I needed to start having a relationship spiritually
Hmm.
and that was going to be the light and that I was able to bring some more light into my life where she would be like, I think you need to, with all the doubt you have and all the skepticism you feel, pray. And because I love my mom, I was like, well, okay, I don't think it's going to help, but I'll indulge her. And I did. I started to pray. What I didn't realize is I was also meditating and I
Mm.
was also releasing a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the
Hmm.
fear and a lot of the stress and a lot of the pressure
Yeah.
that I was carrying.
You were taking it from the head into the heart.
And I was surrendering.
Yeah.
It goes back to the big battle of my life was fierce independence and self-determination and forging a path and a great deal of heaviness and darkness
Hmm.
and a low vibration to spiritual awakening and surrender because I had gotten to a place where I just couldn't do it anymore. I really felt like I was at the end of my rope and it felt scary at times. Like
Hmm.
I just felt pervasively unhappy and was asking, is any of this worth it? Like, what am I getting toward? I didn't have the vision to understand where I was going, that I should even slow down, that slowing down was okay, that I didn't have to be always on.
Hmm.
I thought I had to be always on. And the moment that they found out that I wasn't on, that everything would be taken away that I had worked
All your
for.
dollars.
all my dollars, all of my academic dollars would be taken away. Or my scholarship might be taken away if I had
Yeah.
gotten an A minus instead of an
Yeah.
A. I mean, it was a very unhealthy and unrealistic place to be. I don't know really how I got through it other than through the grace of God.
Mhm.
And
Was there a moment of like epiphany or something along that time period, or was it a gradual process?
I remember a professor my freshman year, he was trying to do the right thing and it hurt me so deeply. I remember going with him to see him about a paper and he said, "I see how hard you're working. I see how hard you participate. You're always prepared. You need to take some of that pressure off from because you don't have the background that a lot of these other kids and your peers have come to the table with." And I read that and all of my insecurity as I wasn't good enough. And I remember being very taken back and angry. It actually sent me to go talk to a counselor. Thank goodness for counselors. I had never seen one before. I was a freshman in college and I sort of just opened up, like everything came out. And I remember her going, "I can't believe you've been carrying this around
Mm.
for so long and you're doing so well." And I said, "It's interesting because I don't feel like I'm doing so well. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
know on the paper I'm doing well, but I am a hot mess and I'm not happy. So what do I
Mhm.
do?" And that was sort of a turning point for
Mm.
me. I
Mhm.
mean, going and having somebody check me who
Yeah.
academically knew how to push back. Because my
Mhm.
parents, my dad was very busy working. My mom, I think she acquiesced a lot with me. Like I was very strong willed. And
Mhm.
so I'd be like, "You just don't understand." And
Yeah.
she'd be like, "I'm sorry. Well, I'm here if you need me." And she would stop the conversation because she didn't want it to escalate to an argument because she knew I was upset.
Yeah.
Whereas, I met a woman who said, "I think I'm going to have to push back on that way of thinking. Doesn't seem very healthy. And
Mhm.
I know that you want good things in your life, but who's to say if you had those that you'd be happy? And maybe happiness starts from the inside," and things like that that I hadn't really been challenged on before. I hadn't
Mhm.
really heard of before. And I was wanting to go away my junior year and I had friends, I found this way to compartmentalize so much of my life as a young person. I
Mhm.
think about it now and I don't even know how I kept it in all of those different boxes. I couldn't do
Yeah.
it today.
Mhm.
But I did. And so, people in college wouldn't have ever known my experience of high school or before, or
Mm.
even what my financial situation was. Might not have had a lot of clothes, but the ones I had looked darn good on. Probably didn't go to fancy destinations as a family, but I was going to Spain and I was going to travel. So I started to fit in more in that environment that I
Yeah.
aspired to be in. And
Yeah.
so I fit in better. And I did have more friends and more experiences and more social outings. And,
Mhm.
it was a regular college experience. There was just like, I think we find out with a lot of people, there's heaviness and darkness behind those smiles and behind
Yes.
achievements. And for me, that became the back and forth. How
Mm.
much of myself and my heart am I going to open up and surrender and have a relationship with God and really recognize that that spiritual part of my being need to be fed? And how much of it was I going to go down that path carrying all the load on my back by myself? But there was more of a
Yeah.
recognition that it was me on my own, that I was making a choice. I
Mm.
started to become much more aware of the fact that not everybody's making this choice.
Mhm.
My sister bucked the system and didn't get the kind of grades I did and really pushed back on my parents. And they were pretty tough on her. Like, "Your sister did so well. She's
Mm.
worked so hard. You should do the same." And she's first one to say, "Well, I'm not her and I don't want to be her." And I remember
Yeah.
going, "Well, why not? Why don't you want to be me?" She's like, "You're unhappy."
Oh.
And I remember going, "Oh, she's so right." Look, she didn't get out of it easy either. We both had pervasive insecurity around money and finances, and it's something
Mm.
we struggled with throughout our adulthood.
That
And
was a question I was going to ask you about. We'll get into that because I want to circle back to like abundance mindset, how you may have
oh, I
overcome that
mean,
po-
major shifts.
poverty mindset.
So, my brother and sister, my brother less to a lesser extent. Funny enough, he was born the day before my sister's first birthday, and he is a very driven person. He
Okay.
became the family attorney.
Okay.
My sister is a therapist and I'm in public relations. So the funny thing is we all came away with different skill sets we all needed. I was the
Right.
communicator. I was a very feeling person. I had a great deal of
Okay.
empathy for others,
Wow.
despite what I was going through. My sister is a therapist and works in schools. She actually ran the largest mental health agency in Maine for a great deal of period of time. And my brother's an incredibly successful attorney and crushing it.
Oh, that's great.
So, I
Wow.
mean, everybody did incredibly
Yeah.
well. For me, my 20s were tough. I got out of that automatic ladder setting of academia of like, I
Mhm.
knew I had to, if I kept climbing up the ladder in school and doing well, that seemed like a good path. I got recruited into a job right out. I won a scholarship to go start graduate studies before I even started the job. I was always like one step ahead.
Mhm.
I came back from that year in Barcelona in graduate school really lost. And I was lost because I was on the precipice of recognizing that what I had been doing up until then didn't give me the meaning that I was searching for. So I came back and I remember when I hadn't started my job, I had kept my job. So the job I had landed right after college, when I said, hey, by the way, I was a month into the job. I actually just won this really prestigious award to do graduate work, and it starts next September. And I had just started the job in August of 92. And they're like, oh my God, congratulations. That's fabulous. We'll just, go on a leave of absence. And when you get back, you have a job back. Aces. I'm good. Oh, life is good. Again, thinking that that's what I was supposed to want and do. So
Mhm.
I had this security. I was building, didn't have security growing up. All my roles now were based on how to build my own security because I was on my own. I
Mhm.
was a single girl in Washington, D.C. I landed a job. I won a scholarship. I was able to keep the job. They asked me to come back. I did all the things to create security because that's
Mhm.
what I didn't feel I had.
Yeah.
And when I came back from Spain, I sort of delayed the start of going back to that job. I just knew it didn't feel right. I didn't know quite where to go next. I felt a little confused, like, well, maybe this overseas stuff, maybe I'll do something more international. I work for an international organization. I don't really know where to start because it's not on my law school path that I was originally on.
Right.
But I took a little time to think about it. I had enough funds between the first job and grad school scholarship to do that. The heaviness, though, of like, I've been on this sort of certain path and I don't know what happens if I go down this unknown path. I don't even
Mhm.
know how to do it.
Mhm.
I remember getting on a bus. It's a 30 bus in Washington, in the northwest part of Washington, D.C., that goes through Georgetown. And I remember going, I am completely lost. I don't know
Mhm.
where to start. And I remember feeling really disappointed. And that was the lowest part of my life was that moment. You thought it was the academic bucks in the Kmart parking lot, but no, it was being on the 30 bus because that was the first time I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to survive this. It's enveloping me. I should be happy on paper.
Mhm.
I have a fabulous life, but I don't feel good. I couldn't exercise my way out of it. I couldn't study my way out of it. I couldn't achieve my way out of that feeling.
Mhm.
So I was
Mhm.
on this 30 bus looping in front of the White House back up through Georgetown, feeling like this might be as good as it gets. And at that moment, after probably two loops around the city, and the bus driver going, are you getting off? Or are you going to be riding this bus all day?
Right.
I remember just saying, maybe even out loud, because I don't think there was anybody else on the bus at that point, going, I surrender. I give up. And I looked up and the sign said, Community Mental Health Facility.
Mm.
I got off the bus, pulled the cord, got off the bus, walked in, sat down, and it saved me that day.
Wow.
I sat down with a woman who used to work at AOL, had gotten a buyout, had made a bazillion dollars, and then followed her heart's passion. She became a community mental health worker. She was working on becoming a licensed therapist and social worker. And I didn't know that at the time. And my sister was a social worker making, $16,000 a year. And I remember thinking, it's a lovely job and profession, but she can barely pay her bills. And I was drawn to that kind of work myself, but I didn't
Mhm.
allow it to be something to pursue because I didn't think I would be able to be secure.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember sitting across from this woman who was my age at that time. So we're going back quite a long ways. I was 23, 24, and she pushed back on every single notion, just like the woman in college had. And she
Wow.
said, Michelle, She said, I don't understand why, if you are unhappy, you don't make a change. Why is it not acceptable for you?
Mm,
I couldn't answer the question, but I kept saying, it's
mm,
just, I mean, I need to go to law school. And that's why she's like, you don't want to go to law school. I don't know what else to do. And she's like, it doesn't pick anything. Just
mm,
pay your bills and like maybe it's not so prestigious. And that
mhm,
part, my ego had a really rough time with. What do you mean
mhm,
not prestigious? I work so hard and I should be happy, damn it. I've worked so hard. I've
mhm, mhm.
sacrificed so much.
Yeah.
I should be happy. This is what
Yeah.
winning is supposed to mean, right?
Right.
Happiness.
Supposed to feel good.
It's supposed to feel good. You do all the things they tell you to do, and that's the big lie, right?
Mhm.
Pushing for all those things outside of you, thinking they are going to make you happy. And I
Yeah.
think that that was the biggest injustice, I think, for a lot of young people. And I think
Mm,
we've done such a better job today at breaking through those barriers because it kind of dawned on me, late to the party. It's never going to be from these things outside of me. And that was beginning of a very different movement. I mean, I
mm.
ended up in corporate America, funny enough, but I took a
Yeah.
detour. I spent 5 years in nonprofit work doing international development, and I created a tribe of friends and professionals. I did not go in as a communicator. I went in as a research associate, and within a week, the woman running the communications department said, "You're a born communicator. You're not a
Mm, mhm,
researcher." And I was
mhm.
offended. I was like, "What do you mean I'm not a researcher? I'm going to go and, if not law school, I'm going to go get a PhD in political science." She's like, "Huh, really? Well, why don't you join my department? We'll talk more about that." So I did. And within a year, I was the assistant director of communications. And then I applied to graduate school to get a PhD in political science. And the folks at University of California, they were lovely with me, but they said, "You're not getting a PhD in political science." And I were going, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "You're too outgoing. Like, this is not going
Mm,
to be a good professional match for you.
mhm.
You're gonna be too much time alone. Like, you're a very extroverted person." I said, "But I've learned to be very introverted in my life studying." And they're like, "Look, and they were great. They're like, "We know these people at Georgetown running the School of Foreign Service and the business school, and we just want you to go talk to them." They made a
Mm.
phone call while
Oh my
I'm in my
gosh.
interview to the director of Latin American Studies program within the School of Foreign Service and said, "We have this young woman here interviewing for a spot in our PhD program. We think she's a great fit for you." And I was kind of frustrated because I was like, "I'm at School of Foreign Service. What are we talking about? Like stamping passports?" I mean, I was a little bit of a snob about it because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I had a lot of ego driven notions about the world. And again, it was like low vibration. I was
Mm,
working on this perpetual sense of diligence and fear in what I must do versus allowing myself to be led by what brought me joy
yeah.
and what made me happy. And when I went to Georgetown out of a courtesy, I mean, that's how bad it was at the time, like my ego driving things. They were so excited to meet me and they were so happy. I remember going, "Okay, I got to tip away at this icy exterior that I've now created with these people," going, "Sure, I'll come by as a courtesy."
Mhm.
And then like a week later, they're like, "We'd love for you to come here." And I remember going, I looked up online how much it cost to go do this master's program, like, I have $50,000 a year. And I said, "I'd love to, but can't afford it." I stayed at my
Yeah.
job. And they called me back a week later, "We'll pay for you to come."
Wow.
So I had a full ride to go to Georgetown.
That's crazy.
I was incredibly blessed. Somebody was looking out for me.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say that's divine intervention right there.
it was divine intervention, and I really deserved to have, a proverbial kick in the you know what. And I went and told my boss at my job, I got into Georgetown, so I guess I need to resign. And once again, she said, "You don't need to resign." I said, "Well, some of my classes are in the day, they're not all at night. It's not that kind of program, it's all involved." She's like, "Work when you can." I mean, how many people have that happen?
Amazing.
And it was because I was at the place where I started to say, "I'm going to stop trying to plan the next 5 years of my life and I'm going to let
Mhm.
you lead me.
Yeah.
Where do you want me to go?" And I
Yep.
started to realize, and I was starting to get more into personal development. I
Mhm.
was trying to read more. I was trying to understand more about happiness as an inside job, which
Yeah.
was a new phrase to me at the time. I was like, "What do you
Yeah.
mean happiness is an inside job?" It's when you have these things and achievements, that's where happiness comes from, right? No,
Yeah.
happiness is an inside job. And I got
Yeah.
really busy working on that.
Yeah.
I was in my late 20s and things really started to shift little
Okay.
by little, little by little. It still was a lot of, I had decades now
Mhm.
of a belief system that wasn't serving me and a view of the world. And, they always ask, and I ask this of my son now, do you believe that the universe is benevolent or not?
Mm. Mhm.
And I remember thinking, the universe is a harsh world. Well, if you believe that, then it
Mm.
is, right? But I had
Yes.
all these blessings and wonderful things that were happening, despite the fact that I was still having a difficult time being at a state of joy and operating there consistently.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I was married, which was a few years later. I got married in my early 30s. I had a very close relationship with my grandmother on my father's side because we had lived with them when I was young. My grandparents had gone through a lot of drama and trauma in their time. They lost an 8-year-old to childhood disease and an 18-year-old in the Korean War, the year my father was born. And so for them, the arrival of a baby to two teens wasn't a curse, it was a blessing. They
Mhm.
saw
Mhm.
my arrival as a blessing and
Mhm.
nothing
Mhm.
else could have changed their minds. And they showered me with love. And they were older. My grandmother was in her 40s when she had my dad.
Oh.
So she was, well into her 60s, even though I had young teen parents myself. She was much older. And when I was, my 30s, my grandmother was in her 90s. And
Oh.
so I had this really strong relationship with her and my grandmother wasn't educated. She was a seamstress. That was her job. She raised 8 children. Unfortunately, 2 died before their
Mm.
time. And in fact, we lost my eldest aunt, the oldest of the family, before my grandmother died. So she withstood a lot.
Yeah.
My grandfather became an alcoholic after losing his daughter. They were
Oh.
quarantined to the house, and she was taken from the house and died in a hospital with the nurses that were caring for her. And
This was the 8-year-old?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Back in the 40s, and
Mm.
they weren't allowed to leave their house. Their house was under quarantine. So imagine it would be like COVID in our
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
but back in the 40s.
Yeah.
But my grandmother was never unhappy a day in her life when I met her, when I came into the world. Now,
Mm.
I'm sure she went through great darkness,
Mhm.
but she had cancer in the early 70s in a time when you didn't survive cancer, and she did. I was asked to write. My dad and my aunts knew as the writer in the family that I was pretty good with words. So when she passed away, not unexpectedly, but pretty quickly, she'd gone on this fabulous family trip to visit all of us. We all congregated in Maine and we
Mm.
thought it'd be her last big trip, but we didn't think she would die the day she got back. And she had gone on this fabulous trip, saw everybody, spent time with everybody. She had fun, she laughed. We all had serious talks with all of us, and the joke with my sister and I was, have a baby already. You're both married. You've been married for a while. Have a baby already. Like, we understand why you didn't have it sooner. You had young parents, but you were twice their age now.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
a baby. And to my brother, who was dating a woman at the time, she's like, and marry her already. So she just sort of went around, get married, have a baby, and like signed up, peace out. And the next day arrived home, where she was living with my aunt in Georgia, and had a sudden massive heart attack and died instantly
Oh.
after having her favorite meal.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So I was asked to do her eulogy, and I had to sit down and do an accounting of my grandmother's life and realize everything that I had done in my life was the opposite of what my grandmother had done. My
Huh.
grandmother was not an academic powerhouse. My grandmother didn't have any scholarships. My grandmother didn't go to college. My grandmother didn't have any great jobs. My grandmother was a seamstress. She was working class and she was happy. That will really wake you up.
Yes.
I delivered a eulogy that I don't think had a dry eye in the place in the end, because I looked out. Here's my grandmother in her 90s who doesn't have any more living friends. My grandfather had been gone for 20 years. It was packed. It was a packed church because my grandmother had impacted so many lives because she was happy.
Mhm.
And she gave everybody every bit of her. And I
Wow.
had spent all of my life inward to that date, working really hard, studying, working long hours in my jobs, trying to better myself financially, trying to do the opposite of what I had experienced growing up, to come to full circle to realize that while all of those things might have been nice to have, my grandmother figured out life without having gone through all of that. And I desperately wanted to be happy. And here was the epitome of happiness. And I wanted to have an impact on the world. My grandmother had impact on so many people, so many people. There was this Afghan family who had immigrated to Washington, D.C. in the 90s, young man, his wife, and they had a small baby. And I remember telling my grandmother, they have this food cart outside of my work where I worked for the International Development nonprofit. I was running from grad school class to working, trying to balance it all. And I didn't often have times to eat. And they would stop me, Michelle, come, come, come. They had no money. They had food cart
Oh.
at the beginning, at the beginning of food carts, before they became
Mhm.
food trucks. It was a cart, and they would feed me every day and wouldn't let me
Oh.
pay.
Oh my goodness.
And I told my grandmother, I said, there's this family from Afghanistan. I only know their first names, but I see them every day when I go to work. They make sure I have like a hot dog, chips, and a soda or something. They would not allow me to not eat that day because they knew I was trying to do all this stuff. My grandmother showed up, unbeknownst to me, on my graduation from grad school with a box. And she said, you need to take me to where this Afghan family's food cart is. And we're going, it's a strange stop in our visit of Washington, D.C., but okay, I guess we're going to go eat hot dogs at the food cart. And I loved them. So I was like, let's do this. No, my grandmother had been making baby Afghans and clothes and stuff for them to thank them for taking care of me.
Oh my goodness.
And she walked up to them and she said, thank you for taking care of my granddaughter. This is for you, and held their baby. And it was a
Oh.
bond and then we've had for, decades. I haven't worked there since the 90s. So, here I was at my grandmother's funeral giving this eulogy, realizing my grandmother had had the most profound impact on so many people,
Mhm.
so many generations.
Mhm.
She had 8 children. We had a bazillion first cousins, several second cousins. So she had grandchildren, great grandchildren, and great great grandchildren.
Mm.
And, she was a living saint. And so
Wow.
that really was the pivotal moment. I
In your
said,
life.
got it.
So
Now
what
I'm
did
in a
you
place.
what happened after that? How did it change for you?
I showed up differently. I mean, it's not like I went the next day and quit my job, but I did show up differently. I started realizing that authenticity, which my grandmother was as authentic as they got, was important. And I was a good person. I kind
Mhm.
of hid behind not that I wasn't nice or kind, but I sort of hid who I was behind the hat I wore. So I
Yeah.
was the dutiful student in academia, and I was the powerhouse rising star in the corporate ladder. But no one really knew who I was. I sort of hid that for weekends and family. I don't know really why, but I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. And I started to let go of all of that and
Mhm.
just showed up as myself. Funny enough, the other shoe didn't drop. In fact, things got better.
Yeah.
And I started talking more about things that were important to me. I found out I was having a baby the following summer. The best thing that ever happened in my life was
Oh.
becoming a mom
Yeah.
and letting go of worrying. I remember
Mhm.
calling up the president of my company at that time and saying, when I come back from maternity leave, something I would never have done or thought to do beforehand, I don't want to come back full time,
Mm.
and I want to work from home, and I want a raise, and I want a promotion. And I just put in all the asks because that's because what was in my heart at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, probably going to get fired. And instead, she said, okay.
Mhm.
And that was the beginning of, really, nobody had worked from home then.
Mhm.
You didn't. You put your kid in
Right.
daycare or you had somebody come to your house, and she said, "We want you. So you do what you need to do and we'll make sure we'll do right by you." And
Yeah.
I remember realizing like, "Huh, it's okay to want what you want, to take care
Yeah.
of your family, and it's
Yeah.
okay to be happy. I can show them that I'm happy. I love being a mom, and I can show the people that I work with that I love being a mom without them worrying that I'm not a good corporate executive."
Yeah.
In fact, they
Yeah.
were like, "Bring the baby. We want to see the baby." I remember thinking, and
Yeah.
and and so it just more and more and more, right?
So
The
shifting
blessing
into authenticity, and then you end up sort of releasing the pressure of always needing to seek security because
completely.
you're out of that mindset where you feel lack and you're into the mindset where you feel like everything is going to come to you.
Probably the happiest I've ever felt was this moment, the time I was on maternity leave. And it's interesting because I could let all the stuff in my mind go because, when you're on maternity leave, you're on sort of maternal instinct, right?
Yep.
You're waking up at odd times of the night to feed a baby, and get a baby to go to sleep and to care for them. So you're not really using that part of your brain that requires deep thinking on problem solving in the
Right.
workplace, right?
Right.
You're working on sheer adrenaline and hopefully as much sleep as you can get. It was a relief for me. It felt
Wow.
very joyous. And my husband
Wow.
and I were in this a very blissful state of I had to rely on him because
Yeah.
my maternity leaves back then weren't paid.
Yeah.
We have terrible maternity leave in general in the US. I think it's getting better for sure, but it's not like Europe where you get a year of paid leave or anything like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, there was no paid leave.
I had to depend on somebody. Novel
Yeah.
idea for me. And I had to completely depend on my husband. I mean, we're a family. I'm married. Of course, that makes sense. But I had always been this engine that goes and goes and goes. And being able to relax, I think it made us both very happy. He
Mm.
felt like he could take care of me for once because I was
Yeah.
always like, go, go, go. And I
Right.
needed to be taken care of. And quite frankly, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I had this like little period of time that was just very blissful.
Mm.
And I started to realize that good things can happen when you're not working hard. I
Yes.
didn't feel like I was pushing boulders up hills.
Right.
I had been pushing boulders up hills since I
Wow.
was 6 years old. And I
Yeah.
started to recognize that when my energy was at a vibration of joy and happiness, I could manifest really good things. I got a
Yes.
promotion and a raise and flexibility in my job set because I was speaking from my heart. Like she
Yeah.
could have said no, and it could have in another setting been no, but I felt really a lot of conviction. And I didn't feel like, damn it, if I don't get it, I'm going to quit. I just said, this is what I really need. And I feel really aligned with it.
Mhm.
And I know that this is what my family needs to have happen. I cannot be commuting 2 hours a day, stay up all night with the baby,
Yeah.
travel
No.
the way I do for this job around the globe
Mhm.
and have my sanity, and I'm not going to. And
Mhm.
people respect when you put boundaries in, you actually respect your own boundaries. I
Mhm.
just always thought, I think when I was younger, that if nobody intervened, then I guess I wasn't meant to be saved or what have you. And
Mm.
realize that a lot of people don't know that you need saving. You look like you're doing fine, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And so, my husband and I got real smart and focused on living from a place of intention, using affirmations. And my
Mhm.
husband is from Peru originally and came here as an immigrant at 19, not from entirely different circumstances financially, but very different vibrational circumstances.
Okay.
I always felt dread and pressure and darkness. He felt levity and love, and life was good. And so we had very similar socioeconomic backgrounds and cultural experiences from a religious standpoint. We're both Catholic, but so that we sort of had these common bonds, but we
Mhm.
couldn't have been from more different dark and light places. Like,
Interesting.
they were the salsa celebrating. Every Saturday night was a party with their grandparents and the aunts and uncles and the cousins. And to this day, it is like that.
Oh, wow.
And I spent years alone in my room
Mm.
studying and
Mhm.
forgoing celebrating with my family
Mm.
oftentimes because I thought I had to sacrifice.
Mhm.
And, coming together, he became a little bit more like me in terms of becoming more responsible in I guess we're, adults and parents now. Like we need to
Yeah.
really like figure this out. And I was already on this train that had left the station. Like, what are you talking about? Catch up. And it allowed me to slow down a little and
Yeah.
allowed him to really step into his full potential
Mm.
and allowed me to realize my potential by actually going inward and
Releasing.
focusing
Yeah.
more on my inner being, my spirituality.
Mm.
I still worked hard, but it was without the attachment to outcome.
Mm. Mhm.
And when I think that was the key for me, like I put a lot out into the world that I wanted and I wanted to experience and I wanted to do and I wanted to achieve, but I started to not attach myself to the outcome. And if it happens, great. And if it doesn't, I can survive. Whereas
Mhm.
growing up, it was like life or death. It felt
Yeah.
very like all or nothing, black or
Yeah.
white. And I allowed myself to be like, you know what? Hey, this is pretty good. This is,
Right.
even if this doesn't get better than now, I'm happy
Yeah.
and I feel free. And the freedom came out of actually more responsibility. I had a baby, but
Yeah.
sort of really stepping into that role that felt natural and felt intuitive,
Mhm.
even though I had resisted it because watching my parents struggle with
Mm.
being young with children made it something that I avoided. I
Mhm.
didn't want to be a young parent.
Mm.
I didn't think the experience of being a young parent could be a positive one. I watched the struggle
Yeah.
versus I was in my mid 30s by the time we had my son, and we had a level of financial security. We still lived in an apartment at the time because, it's expensive real estate around here, but we
Mhm.
were on our way to figuring these things out. And we both had achieved a lot academically. We were in, good jobs, and it was already better than where we had started. So we were already a leg up in that
Mhm.
part. But where we
Mhm.
really needed to grow was emotionally. And to
Yeah.
really, for me, shed a lot of those belief systems that were not serving, had not served me well. Now, my
Mhm.
husband would argue that I would not have gotten to where I was had I not believed a lot of those things, because I worked incredibly hard and I pushed through a lot of barriers.
Mhm.
My counter to that is I probably could have done it without pushing a boulder up the hill for, several
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
It really nearly took the life out of me. And then I finally got to my mid 30s and said, I don't want to live like that. I've
Yeah.
seen glimpses throughout my adulthood that it doesn't have to be that way. And I want
Right.
to step into it fully. And that really recognizing my grandmother having everything I wanted: love, family, freedom, happiness, and it didn't come in the form of any of the things that I had achieved, was a real hard reality to kind of
Mhm.
swallow and be like, well, look, it is what it is now. I'm here.
Mhm.
But I just learned an incredibly important lesson later in life,
Mhm.
that there's another way. And
Mhm.
I'm going to focus on what would my grandmother do? And that
Yes,
became
I
the
love
joke.
that.
What would my grandmother do?
Yeah.
My
But
grandmother would
you
pray
you
about it.
needed to have those experiences to get the lesson.
Absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
there is no light unless there's darkness,
No.
right?
Right, of course,
The
exactly,
whole
that's where there's both.
the whole balance in life, it
Right.
becomes like, for me, it was self-determination and independence, to recognizing actually you can get a heck of a lot more of what you want in life, because I do believe the stuff, be it was, the thoughts of a young person, and, I thought I needed the stuff, but what we all really want is to be free.
Yes.
What we all really want is peace.
Right, that's what's
Peace
behind
in
the
our
stuff is the
hearts.
freedom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
peace in our
Yeah.
minds. And honestly, you can have a lot of stuff, you can have a lot of money in the bank and not have freedom or peace. So
Right.
what is it worth then?
Right. Right.
And I was starting to
Yep.
get to that place where I had a little bit of that, and I hadn't yet arrived at being in a full state of peace. Going through that experience with my grandmother, having my son, I started to really surround myself with people who were more on that spectrum. I had isolated myself. I had
Mm.
had friends and I had gone out and I'd been social, but I'd spent a lot of time alone. And I started to really change my habits. I wanted
Mhm.
my son, I have an only child. I didn't want him to be alone. I wanted
Mm.
him to grow up with friends and for us to have the common experience with other couples. And so we really did surround ourselves with people who I consider far more spiritually enlightened at that point than we were. And
Mhm.
they,
Mhm.
I always say the best thing you can do is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you
Yeah.
or that have figured things out.
Right.
The worst
Right.
thing you can do is be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, I
That
know.
is the worst place to be.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And
Like Richard Branson says that if you wanna become a better tennis player, you have to play with somebody who's better than you.
if you want to have a good life,
Wherever. Right.
look at people who are enjoying their lives and are at
Yeah.
peace and who feel free and who are,
Yep.
for me, deep in having a deep connection
Yeah.
and being able to talk about things, not achievements, like experiences
Mhm.
and meaning of life and those kinds of conversations. And I am incredibly blessed. We kind of fell into this environment with some of the people that I had been working with were those people, and they
Okay.
became personal friends who I've now had well over 20 years in my
Wow.
life. The godfather of my child, my godmother of my child are people I worked with.
Oh,
And
wow.
the husband of one of the people I worked with, and she's one of my dearest friends on the planet. And I think she just radiates spiritual enlightenment. And
Wow.
one of our dear friends is one that said, "Hey, here's an idea. I'm in a Bible study. Why don't you join me?" And we're going, "Bible
Oh,
study? I'm Catholic. We don't really do Bible." And and funny enough, I felt very drawn. I'll go. Why not? Maybe I'll learn something. Best thing I ever did.
wow.
Best thing I
Okay.
ever did, because it really busts through a lot of the myths in my mind about the way the world worked and relationships with God. And it just sort of opened my mind to things
Mm-hmm.
that I, hadn't considered.
Yeah.
And these people have become sisters, part of a tribe. I know we will, our children are getting older and are going to be flying the nest
Mm-hmm.
in the next few years. These are the people I'm going to grow old with. These are the
Oh.
people that make us better, and they make me realize like what we've been able to achieve in a really short amount of time since those breakthroughs has been quadruple or quintuple what we had been able to achieve, even though my life was full of achievement in the first half of it,
Mm-hmm.
because of the change in mindset and the
Mm-hmm.
change of belief system
Yeah.
and the recognition that the separateness or the separatedness that I
Mm-hmm.
felt for so many years as a young person was me not letting God in.
Mm-hmm.
Me
Mm-hmm.
thinking I had to do it alone. Me thinking I had to, there's the only way I could do it is I had to prove that I could be independent and strong and smart and all of these things. And yes, you need to work hard in all of those things. Partly, though, you start to realize that when you show up on a certain vibration, things fall into place rather
Yes.
easily.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're part of something bigger. You're part of something huge.
And you start to realize how
Yeah.
connected we all are. And
Yes.
then
Oh
you're
God,
like,
yes.
all the light starts to flow
Oh,
in.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel that. That's so true. So what happened then? You got married and then, you started. So are you still working at that same, you're not at that same place now?
No, I have an even bigger job.
Okay.
So I'm an executive in another. I kind of grew up in that other agency, and then I was recruited into my current position, and I'm an executive vice president in a PR agency, and I have a phenomenal job of connecting with people,
Mm.
clients, and our employees. And I get
Mhm.
to, demonstrate great deal of not only like my understanding of our profession, but more importantly, I think the human condition. Empathy is important, and I have a
Oh,
great
yes.
deal of empathy.
Wow. And so how do you bring that spiritual aspect into that corporate job?
I show up as me every day. Look, that they have me there because of what I know, but I think they keep me there because of who I am, not what I
Yes. And
know.
that brings it, doesn't that bring it all together? It brings
Yeah.
together everything that you've been through.
I have tremendous people around me. The leadership in my company, like we all are imperfect, flawed people, but I would say the work family that I have right now, I've always been able to make friendships and have deep connections. I'm still very close with people. Like I said, my very first person I ever met, my first job that I was recruited to out of college, is the godmother of my son. We've
Wow.
known each other for 30 years this past August.
Mm.
The godfather is the husband of a woman I worked with at the last agency that I was at for 19 years. Our families are intrinsically connected for life now.
Mhm.
We're bonded.
Mhm.
Um, so those and people who were my mentors, I still occasionally will say, "Hey, what are you doing for lunch? Let's get together," because we mean a lot to each other,
Yeah.
not just within that work context, but as I got older and frankly became more secure in who I was, not because of what I could do, but in who I was, and accepted myself and had a little bit more personal self-worth that didn't derive from achievement, I got a lot more fun to be around. And, I think, one of the things that I always say is I'm not afraid to just be honest. Like when I see somebody struggling, or showing up in a way that's not the right way to show up in a corporate environment, in any work environment, it doesn't matter
Mhm.
if it's corporate. The thing to do isn't to get angry or worry. The thing to do is saying, "Hey, what's going on with you? What can I do to help?" Because
Mhm.
usually there's
Mhm.
something going on. People don't
Yes.
just show up angry. There's
No.
usually something going on. They're at a low
Exactly.
vibration for a reason. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's my job to help them take a step back, do what they need to do. Do they need to go rest? Do they need some support? Do they need somebody to take on tasks that it's getting too much for them? I've gone through that. I know what
Mhm.
it's like. So it's
Mhm.
very easy now for me, as somebody with a more of an eagle eye view, to be like, look, there's no reason to struggle. We are in a place where we are working in teams for a reason. So if you find yourself alone, a lot of that is your own construct, right? Or your sense, your ego's gotten the best of you. Like, they're not going to give me the promotion unless I show them this and unless I do that. And, I just want to say to everyone, take a collective deep breath, because actually there is another way. You can
Mhm.
have value and still be authentic and still be
Mhm.
vulnerable. I think it's
Right.
incredibly difficult for people, but one of the most brave things you can do is say, I don't have this. I need help.
Well, do you think that this comes down to issues of trust?
I think it comes down to issues of understanding how life works,
Mm.
because it doesn't and it shouldn't matter what that other person says or does. The
Mm.
problem is we have a lot of attachment to the
Mm.
outcome. Look, if somebody responds negatively to your vulnerable moment, shame on them. That shows
Right.
their lack of, enlightenment,
Yes, it
frankly.
says more about them.
Says way
Absolutely.
more about them than it
Yeah.
does about you being in a weakened state, because it's
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah.
I do think once you realize that look, it's taken me a really long time to get here, but I realized, like, life works based on your energetic state, your relationship with God or the divine or spirit or source or higher power, however you want to relate to it. For me, it's God, and recognizing that that is not something that's outside of me, that's something that's inside of me, that you tune into, that you feed.
Mhm.
And when you surrender, which is actually the opposite of most people who are working in these traditional corporate jobs, right? We think you don't surrender, you
Mhm.
forge through and you and I
Right.
always like to say, here's the Trojan horse part of this. Relax, be stealth, but with a light heart, not with the
Mhm.
heaviness of the world. I already
Mhm.
lived that. I don't want to live
Mhm.
that anymore. And I don't need
Mhm.
to. I do much better work when I come at it from a light heart and a place of love, even if it doesn't look smooth on the first take.
Yeah.
So what? What does that say? Like,
Yeah.
I have to be perfect in all circumstances? I'm past that in my life. That's the
Yeah.
really great thing about growing older, is
Mhm.
I think a lot of us have gotten to a place where we're like, I
Yeah.
know who I am. I know
Yeah.
the worth I bring. And if someone else doesn't see it, that's actually unfortunate for them. I think when we have fear based responses because we're not really secure and we're worried about the outcome and we're worried about the state, it actually creates the environment to give you something to be worried about.
That's right. Yeah, you get more of what you're putting out, your vibration. That's so profound, everything you've said. I mean, I love the journey that you took from that hard work to the letting go. Because there are two ways to look at life, and there you can succeed with heart with that kind of grinding it out, but it's not. It
Absolutely. It
doesn't feel
served
good.
me. It
Yeah.
served me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I arrived at places, I achieved things that allowed me into doors that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to walk through. Personally and emotionally, it was rough. It was
Hmm.
going through a ringer constantly. I have conversations with my 15-year-old that are very different than the way I was raised, having gone through the experience. My parents didn't go through the experience to be able to give me that
Yeah.
counsel or advice. My child knows. He's even watched me, even in his early childhood, still working on these things. I'm
Hmm.
an incredibly hard worker. He was very little, and back in the day when we had Blackberries instead of iPhones and Apple phones and what have you, he would take it and he would run over. Can't tell you how many Blackberries I had to have replaced because he'd throw them in the toilet because he knew it was end of the day, mommy. He was a
Oh my
toddler.
gosh.
No,
Oh,
and it's like,
so funny.
this is my time now. You're supposed to be done. And I thought I could multitask and have them in the
Yeah.
bath and have the Blackberry in my ear. And he used to tell them, like, I had this one who's still a dear friend, guy called me in the evening because we were in meetings all day. So we'd troubleshoot and go over the day at night. And I said, look, the baby's in the bathtub, my toddler's in the bathtub, whatever. He grew up with this guy. He'd say, hi, Mr. Sandeep, as he got older. And it was endearing. I was like, look, 10 years earlier, and I would have never been ever promoted because I would have been seen as not focused 100% on work. Had a baby at the same time, but I was trying to do it all. My kid's grown up in an environment where he still saw his mom work incredibly hard. I still had to make some sacrifices. Like, it wasn't all rosy, but my outlook and my perspective and my way of being in the world was rapidly evolving and changing from the moment he came into the world until
Yeah.
now. He has very different dreams and goals. And if you asked him what he wants to be, he'll say happy,
Aw.
the right answer, right? And
Yes.
I don't have any concern that he's going to be quote unquote the starving artist. I know that whatever he does, he'll do well because he's grown up in an environment where we work hard to achieve the things we want, but we are now in a state of being where we learned how to manifest them. We don't push
Mhm.
boulders up hills. And when we
Mhm.
start to push boulders up hills, we're a close-knit family. We'll remind each other, hey, grinding it out is one way, but
Mhm.
there is a better way. Maybe
Yes.
we need to go take some time off and get into a higher state of being and then go back to solving that problem. And I need to be
Amen. Yep.
reminded. I need to be
Yeah.
reminded every now and then.
I think everyone needs that reminder. It's interesting. I was having this talk with someone else about the idea of repetition. It's not something that you could just say, all right, I know this now. It's some of these things need affirmation. They need, you need to have a constant kind of repetition of those thoughts to keep in that mindset.
Yeah, I thought I was the slightly further ahead than my husband on like spiritual enlightenment and personal development because I was absorbing the books. But my husband, interestingly, once we started having conversations about this, he was much more. Has an engineering mindset.
Mm,
He was much better about implementing it consistently. I would be talking about the big picture and what we needed to do. And I was great about setting the vision for our family and what I wanted to have accomplished. He would actually pave each step in stone. And he'd
wow.
look at me and say, I'm done my affirmations for the day. How about you? Come
Yeah.
back to that. Or, my son is one of the most incredibly well grounded, balanced people you'll meet. He's an incredible kid. But I remember when he was much younger and he'd get frustrated with something, or he would feel like he wasn't growing fast enough or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
He's 6'1" now and he's an
Oh, wow.
incredibly athletic kid and
Oh.
very good academically. But my husband would sit him down and say, well, what are your affirmations for the day, Ben? And, we'd go through it. And I kind of think everybody should have their cheerleader moment of the day where he'd be like, I'm strong enough. I'm smart enough. I love myself. My family loves me. All is well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he'd go to bed happy.
That's what it's all about.
Right? At the end of
Yeah.
the day,
Yeah.
I really do think it is about wanting to get to a place. And once you have experienced it, it. Like,
Yeah.
even if it's for a moment, you're like, that experience I had of feeling free and being at peace.
Yeah, because you don't have to chase happiness. You have to surrender to it.
You have to surrender and receive it. For me, that
Yes.
was a maternity leave where
Yeah.
everyone was like, are you
Yeah.
crazy? Aren't you exhausted? I said, completely, but I'm in utterly
Mm,
blissful,
yeah.
peaceful, happy state.
Because you were forced, the universe or God or the source had given you the circumstances where you had to stop doing what you were doing
Yep.
and do something
Now,
else. Gave you something beautiful to do in exchange.
absolutely. Now it's like it's beautiful because I'm at a place, and I'm sure you're there as well, where I don't feel like I have to prove myself to others.
No,
There
yeah.
are things I want to do for myself, like
Mhm.
new skills that I'm learning, even part of the journey we're on in terms of launching, our own podcasts and writing books and what have you. For me, there are personal milestones.
Mhm.
And that is very engaging. I could spend
Mhm.
hours and hours. I have to kind of like, wow, I've been at this for a while. I need
Yeah.
to stop because I need to move on to other things.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't feel like work, right? It's
Yeah.
incredibly life giving. It's not
Right.
draining.
It's inner directed work, which makes a big
Exactly.
difference. That's a beautiful way of looking at it. You have young parents. How is that?
It's fantastic. I
Okay.
mean, I have to say, it wasn't when I was younger, but it's
Okay.
great now. Yeah, I have very young parents.
Because it feels like your whole family and your self-discovery, your personal development, and then now you have this wonderful group of this team of all these friends you've developed. You've got these young parents who you can have this great relationship. You got your husband, your kids, your kid. It's
I,
like it's all come
It's
together.
all come together. It really has. Look, we all went through a lot. I was younger, my siblings were younger, my parents were young parents. It was not easy. And I would say it took really getting out of the house and having children of our own before a lot of those wounds were healed.
Mm,
But,
mhm,
I always look back, my parents did a incredible job. Like,
mhm,
the fact that we all ended up doing so well in our lives and achieving, which I do think is important.
mhm,
We wanted to break that cycle of poverty that we had experienced. We did.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
our children are never going to go back there. That's the kind of
right.
thing. Like, you kind of break through that and you realize like you broke through it for generations to come. And that was a tremendous gift that my parents helped us achieve because they put the seed within us to go further. And
Right.
I think if they hadn't done that, as much pressure and as much of that feeling of heaviness that it provoked in me, and to extent my sister, my brother, I feel like it's there, but it's tuned in differently. But
Okay.
as much as it created that, it also enabled so much good to happen. So
Mhm.
I can sit back now and say, was it worth it? Yes. Because quite frankly, the memories of that are that they're memories. They don't
Yes.
sting as hard, except for
Mhm.
perhaps the academic bucks in the snowstorm. I think now I have such a different relationship with my
Yeah.
parents. In my 20s, like a lot of people, you blame your parents for things that aren't right in your life that don't feel
Mhm.
like and it took a while to kind of get to the realization that it's nobody's fault and I got to figure this out. And
Mhm.
my parents did do a great job and they did the
Mhm.
best they could with what they had, but they actually did better than most. They did better than most who
Yeah.
had more tools in the tool chest and more to draw from life
Yeah.
experience. And yeah, on the other end, I get to say I have a fantastic relationship today. Took a
Mhm.
while to get there. We, didn't always see eye to eye. My mom and I have always been really close. My dad and I are super close, but we also had those moments of just not syncing 100%. I would say we are both each other's biggest fans. He knows that I'll always be there, and I know that he'll always be there. And I think that that's been the biggest healing thing. Same with my siblings.
Mhm.
We all kind of, we grew up in Maine, but we all went in different
Mhm.
directions, but we are really close despite the
Mhm.
distance.
Okay.
We know, like when we see each other, there's a great deal of love. There's a great deal of, we like each other. We respect each other. We
Mhm.
know what we all went through. We have a common heritage and we recognize the bonds that were made having gone through a lot of those difficult times
Mhm.
as kids.
You seem to have a knack for relationship building.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my thing. Like everybody's got a superpower. Yeah, I think for me, like I really do think it's about building relationships. I've gotten much better at it. I have friends that do go back a really long time,
Mhm.
but more importantly, I always say this to one of my oldest friends on the planet. It really doesn't matter how many I have, but the ones I have are solid gold. It's
Yeah.
nice to be able to be at that place where you see people for who they are in their
Yes.
most authentic state and you enjoy them.
Right. And so what would you say is the key for people who want to work on their relationship building skills? What's the key to doing that?
Oh, it's the simplest thing on the earth, and yet the hardest thing. You have to love yourself. You have to have a relationship with yourself. You have to forgive yourself. You have to show great empathy for yourself, not pity, but empathy. And you have to treat yourself well. And I didn't do that for a really long time. I
Mhm.
didn't have a great deal of self worth. I felt like I had to prove my existence as
Mhm.
a product of teen pregnancy. I had a lot of pressure, and I thought that if I did really well, externally that would make me worthy on the inside, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the reality is, once you get to a certain place in time and you can make those breakthroughs, you realize, people have self-worth based on just pure existence. There's
Yeah.
nothing about what they've done, what they've achieved, who they are, where they've been. It's just because they are.
Yeah.
And that we
Yeah.
are, at least from my perspective, we are ultimately all spiritual beings having a very human experience, and
Yes.
that human experience is what connects us. We are all signed
Yes.
up on some way or form or another to go through all these highs and lows
Mhm.
and to hopefully bring, I think, more love to the world. And you do
Is that
that.
what you think it's all about? What do you think it's all about,
i i
this
think
human experience?
I think it is about love. I think it is about, I've come to realize it is about surrender. I've come to realize it's about relationship with God, which I
Mhm.
do think my personal philosophy has come to, and it's really been something that's come as an adult, not in my younger formation, but that's within us. It's not
Mhm.
separate from us. I think, regardless of sort of what your religious persuasion or background might be, this idea that God made us in his image is something
Mhm.
that's not lost on me, that despite the fact that we are flawed and imperfect, there is a divinity within us that we
Mhm.
need to all learn how to tap and access. And when we do, that's when we're in our highest state of being. That's
Yeah.
when we are the most creative, when we
Mhm.
are at the most powerful state of being, because I don't think there is a more powerful phenomena in the world than love.
I agree.
So I think if you learn to love yourself, which is not an easy task, but it is as simple as that, then you can learn to love others. But
Hmm.
it's really difficult to genuinely love others if you haven't learned to do that for
Hmm.
yourself.
And
You think,
others will feel that if you don't have that expressed within
yeah,
yourself.
and it will
Yeah.
show up in ways you don't really expect it, like
Right.
resistance and blocks
Right.
and stuff like that. And I think until you really say, doesn't matter what I weigh, it doesn't matter what I do for a job, it doesn't matter how much money I have, it doesn't matter all the flaws and mistakes and all those things that being human comes with.
Hmm.
I have value and I'm worth being loved. And if you
Yeah.
can do that, then you can love other people genuinely.
Hmm.
And if you can't do that, here's the thing, it's going to be rough
Hmm.
because you kind of keep coming back on why relationships aren't working
Right. Because you'll attract
because you
people at a
don't,
similar level of vibration
yeah,
if you're
because there's
wherever
some
you
part
are.
of you that doesn't feel like you're worth loving.
Yes. And then when people evolve and they are able to, ascend, then you'll find shifts in relationships and you'll outgrow certain relationships and change, how you relate to people.
I think, look, a scarcity mindset is something that I grew up with without
Mhm.
realizing what it was.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
thought, I don't have a lot. I want to get more. And if I get more, I'll be happy. That was a very, naive but young, childlike way of looking at the world. I'm not feeling happy if I do these things and achieve these things and become the good girl and achieve high states of being in terms of external achievement that will create happiness and I'll have more and I'll be happier and happier and happier. I did all those things. I wasn't particularly happy. In fact, I was looking at how do I get out of this world,
Right.
which is
Right.
probably the lowest place in the state of the human existence. When you're
Mhm.
contemplating leaving before
Yeah.
your time,
Yeah.
it's a really dark, dark, dark place. And
Right.
yet, so many people have been there at one point or another. Whether they'd actually go through with it is a whole other story. Just to sit there and to be in that place is it's a hard pill to swallow because people don't want to admit it. It's hard to
Mhm.
admit, but
Mhm.
it is real. And
Mhm.
I think once you recognize that that level of vulnerability is needed so that other people can realize like, hey, that person that looks like they have everything going right for them in the world, that they have literally, the world at a silver spoon and everything's going great and they're so have experienced deep lows,
Mhm.
I might be able to relate to them more. They haven't
Mhm.
had this, perfect existence.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who has. And if they say they
Right.
have, like they either really aren't taking risks in life, they're living a very sheltered existence.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think you're not really living life, right? If
Mhm.
you're living on autopilot and not taking risks, you're really not living up to your full potential. And I don't mean achievement, I mean
Right.
of what the world holds out there to experience.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why we love to travel is it really puts things in perspective.
Yes.
We were on a trip to Greece this summer and we were robbed while we were there. Greece
Oh,
is phenomenal.
okay.
But I made the mistake on the last day of our trip. I had a very expensive necklace that was given to me by my husband that I wanted to use. Totally forgot that it was in my belongings. I would normally put it in a safe, or quite frankly, I wouldn't travel with expensive jewelry. I don't typically do that.
Mhm.
I'd taken out everything and packed everything up because we had an early morning flight. And then I forgot about it. Quite frankly, it was just out of sight, out of mind. And we left for the day. And I hadn't realized that our room hadn't been like, no one had attended our room yet to make the beds and stuff. Lo and behold, I thought I was packed. We just went out, spent the day, had a great time, came back, didn't look at the stuff again because it was packed. We were getting up at the crack of dawn to go to the airport. At the airport, I just happened to open my bag and realized several of the things that I had in there were gone, including this travel jewelry case that had this incredibly expensive necklace that I should never have taken with me. It
Mm.
was not a good form of judgment. But in that moment, you're like, ugh. In an earlier time in my life, I would have probably been devastated because the poverty and the scarcity mindset would have been like, we worked so hard to be able to afford to have nice things, to have something, to have it then taken would have felt devastating. In that
Yeah.
moment, I looked at my husband, I said, oh, you're not gonna believe what happened. I think we were robbed. And I was showing him everything. And he looked at me and he said, well, I know. I said, I know. And he goes, I hope they needed it more than we did. And
Yeah.
and we let go of it.
Yeah, because really having that shift from scarcity to more of an abundance mindset isn't about the things. It's not about money
Not at all.
necessarily. It's about allowing in the richness of the universe. And that part of that is the ability to feel secure and to feel free and to feel generosity and compassion for other people. It's like
And to
all part of
realize
it.
it was just a thing. I mean, it
It's
was
just a
a
thing.
nice thing.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be robbed, but it was like one
No.
of these things where you're like, I felt really relieved and at peace with the fact that we both came to that conclusion almost immediately. Like for someone to take something that doesn't belong to them, and it was a nice hotel,
Hmm.
is something that from a human risk perspective has to require that you be in a place of and not in a wealth space. And all we
Hmm.
could think of is we hope that I don't even know that they would have known that was in there. We hope they realize that's in there and they actually get the value of what it is and they get using it for good, taking
Yeah.
care of their family or something because
Yeah.
we didn't need it. It didn't really
Yeah.
matter. We were free. We
Yeah.
feel good. We had a wonderful
Yeah.
experience and we had a phenomenal time as a family and
Right.
it'll come
Yeah.
back in some other form.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because imagine if you did get very upset over something like that, which is understandable, but then you're holding on to that feeling of being upset.
Yeah, I don't want
And
my
that's
peace
not
to
going to
go
change
away.
it. It's not going to,
I had a great trip. I wasn't
yeah.
going to come off that high. Like we had a great
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
experience. And I've
Yeah.
learned over the years that going down to that low vibration, allowing yourself to stay there just robs your peace. So why would I
Absolutely.
do that?
No,
Let go of
100%.
it.
It's not changing the circumstances. It's not going to transfer out to the other person and make them feel bad for what they've done, or it just doesn't do any good at all.
But my younger self would not have known that. So that's,
Hmm.
I would say,
Hmm.
like the growth part of my
Hmm.
journey was being able to get to a place where I realized, well, wait a minute, it doesn't really matter for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And hopefully it did something good for them and I can let go
Yeah.
of the attachment to it and
Yeah.
we move on.
Wow. Well, that is a very commendable attitude. Not a lot of people would be able to have that level of compassion for other people.
You know, it's interesting. I said this, explained this to my mom, and she said the same thing. She said, we're at a place where we recognize that being in a place of love and
Mhm.
feeling in a state of freedom and peace is so much more important than what we would have gone through to try to recover the stolen item and all of the
Absolutely.
harassment and all of the
Yes.
just taking up the mind space and the
Yeah.
negativity of what we would have experienced. It was really doing ourselves a favor. And again, I can say that at this age, I
Right.
probably can
Right.
definitively tell you that would not have been the case 30 years ago.
Sure. 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 But the idea that you were able to do that and do it like that, so that you knew you didn't want to spend any time in the negative space
I
was,
wanted to enjoy the rest of our family
yeah,
vacation and be in.
that's a real lesson. What do you think are some of the other really important lessons that you've learned over the course of your life?
Life is not meant to be that hard. You can achieve great things by being in the right vibrational state. It doesn't mean you don't work, but there is that sense of grinding it out. I actually find even the term grates on me now. I
Mm,
don't find that to be a really good way to manifest. I think
no.
you can achieve things,
Hmm.
but the costs are really high. So I'm very conscientious of reminding people if you're going to bring something to fruition, why not do it from a state of peace and love and a high vibration, which I know sounds woo woo for a lot of people, but having been the opposite of that for the majority of my life, I know from experience that the costs of grinding it out, the cost of being at a low vibration, you still can manifest. You can still achieve those goals, but the cost of your emotional and mental well being and physical well
Hmm.
being is not worth it. So that's an important lesson. You know, people over things sounds so simple. I
Mm,
think we all kind of know that, but I always joke I collect people, not things
yeah.
like relationships. I
Right.
really
Right.
deeply care about my friends. I don't know when I was younger if I could have said that because I was in this state of scarcity mindset. So I was like everybody for themselves, even though I cared
Yeah.
about my friends. I
Yeah.
don't know that I had the wherewithal to really realize that I can bend time and circumstances now to do whatever my friends need of me. And I feel deeply. Whereas I think I spent a lot of time trying to protect myself when I was
Hmm.
younger.
Hmm.
I feel things very deeply. I love very deeply. And I don't anger that much. And my child might argue with me, but I get over things much quicker.
Yeah.
That he would agree. I didn't allow myself to have a lot of fun when I was young because I thought I had to be responsible. And I realized that being responsible now requires me to be in a state of joy and a state of well being. And so happiness is a premium. So I spent a lot of time talking about it and cultivating it and working at it because I recognized that my child's success, that my husband's success, that my success, the success of my team at my work, the success of my projects that I'm working on requires that I be in that frame of mind. And
Yes.
so the younger me would have been like, how irresponsible. And
Yeah.
the enlightened part of me says, finally, you
Yeah.
get it.
And what practical things do you do to stay in that peace of mind, that mind state, mind space?
Meditation,
Hmm.
prayer.
Hmm.
Sometimes for me, they're melded. There isn't a lot of distinction, but I think emptying the mind is an incredibly important task. Days, you can get real tripped up by a bad day. So I always say, empty your mind at the end of the day and start the new day fresh.
Hmm.
Let it go. Exercise to me is important. I don't
Hmm.
do it as much as I need to, but I know it is very important. So I try to remember we have two very big dogs that need to be walked and like to go on walks. So we walk them quite a bit. I always feel better.
Oh, that's
There's
good.
nothing like a good walk to really put you in a different frame of mind.
Right.
And never underestimate the power of prayer, even if you're skeptical, even if you're, I don't think this has anything to do with religion. I haven't
Hmm.
been a good churchgoer in a long time. I do pray and I do have a very healthy spiritual life. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, if you subscribe, as I do, to the notion that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, if you don't feed that part of you, you're missing out on such a big gift. And I think the point of why we're here, which is
Hmm.
to give and receive love. And if you're not
Hmm.
taking care of that, it is really difficult to do either of those things.
So, what about your biggest blessings? What would you say are your biggest blessings in life?
My son, my husband, my friends, relationship with God, hard earned, that I have a very good relationship with my parents. Despite what was a really rocky, volatile beginning, I think we all have really good hearts. We're imperfect people, but we all love each other. And, you know, my parents are still married after 52 years, starting off at 16 and 18. I think they set this tremendous example. You know, often when I was younger, I think I was frustrated for them and for us because I thought, oh, they're probably better off separate. And I realized that in staying together and weathering the storms and going through the difficult times and growing up together and evolving together, it really set an example for us of we've been very good at working on difficulties in our own marriages, all of us. No one's immune. So
Hmm.
it's a matter of whether or not you have this sense of I don't have this belief of you stay together for the children. I don't think my parents were in that. I think my parents, quite frankly, were motivated by there were a lot of people that didn't believe they could make it. So there was a lot of
Okay.
stubbornness in the beginning. We are
Yeah.
going to succeed just despite them. But
Yeah.
I do think that they genuinely loved each other. That grew over time. And I don't think they know what to do without each other now. And, I think for us, my siblings and I, one of the things we realize is that we are very easy to get over things that don't go right in our marriages and hit the reset button. That resiliency goes a long way because,
Yeah.
like, things come up. They could be the silliest things. You can like not even remember why you're angry at your spouse. Be like, I just know that we haven't talked in a while or what have you. But we're really good at like getting over it. Might be upset in the moment. All three of us tend to be very verbal. So we communicate our feelings very clearly.
Oh my goodness.
But we get over it and we
Yeah.
move on.
That is such a gift that you have parents who are high school sweethearts and are still together. I think that is so beautiful when I see couples who are able to do that because it is so rare.
It's such a rarity. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, I say this somewhat cavalierly, but it's true. I could have been a statistic.
Mhm.
Typically, children of teenage parents become teenage parents. It's very difficult to break the cycle of poverty.
Mhm.
And, it's not that I think my parents were destined for poverty. They're not poor now. But when you have nothing because you were 16 and 18, you're in
Mhm.
a state of poverty. You have
Yeah.
nothing. You
Right.
you don't even have a job.
Right.
So you're starting from zero. So it's very difficult to get out of that cycle. And my parents had a vision and had a drive that then ran through us, some of the darker times of my life, but also the reason why I'm here today. And what I can say is my parents are multidimensional. They were not one trick ponies, right? They
Mm,
had sense of faith and spirituality. I
mhm.
can have conversations with both of them now about the importance of faith and resilience and forgiveness and the importance of people in our lives. We're all imperfect. We don't
Yep.
always agree with each other, but we agree and we connect on the most important things.
That's beautiful. You are doing your podcast, and remind us of the name again.
Yes, the podcast is called Live Your Extraordinary Life. The premise of it is, and it'll be a combination. There'll be conversations, real conversations about creating a life you love and all of the ups and downs in getting there, because we want
Mm,
to have real conversations of how people have gone from what I always say, there's an important saying out there, and I might not get 100% right, but a person can live the same day for 75 years, or a person can live 75 years in one day. What I think is a tragedy is that we do get to a point in life where we sort of settle into a rhythm and we stop looking at the wonder of life and how extraordinary it can be. And we get on autopilot for a variety of reasons. We're busy, we have children, we're running from here and there, we have deadlines, and we stop thinking. We just go through the motions and it's sort of wash, rinse, repeat. And I don't think that that's what's really going to lead you to really living your full potential. You're leaving a lot on the table if you allow yourself to stay there. Like most of us have been there for a
mhm,
while, but then you get to a point where you realize there's a lot of life to be lived. There's a lot of goodness out there, despite
mhm.
all of the bad things. And there are a
Yes.
lot. Again, it goes back into this balance of there's a light and a darkness, and you can't have one without the other. And if you realize that creating a life you love is in your hands, it's extraordinary to hear how ordinary people have created lives they love. Might not be the life you want or the life I want, but they are in love about it. They're passionate about it. And we want to hear more about that. What are you doing to get
Yes.
out of that rut, to realize that midlife is not a way station and then you just go until you retire and then you die,
Yeah.
but that this is another reflection point. It's a reflection point, it's an inflection point, it's an opportunity for you to say, okay, here I am. This is where I'm at now. Where do I want to go from here? What do I want to experience? Who do I want to do it with? What haven't I done that I would like to go? And there's no reason why, if you haven't achieved it by 40, somehow it's beyond
It's
your
gone.
reach.
Right.
And I think
Right.
there's a fallacy. There's some bizarre myth. And certainly when we're younger, we think that, well, first of all, that sounds old. And you start to realize once you're there or past there, you're just getting started.
Absolutely.
You're
Yes.
just starting to know who you are. And you're
Yes.
just starting to recognize the importance of authenticity,
Yep.
that is really the beginning. Everything before is research. And
Yep. It's information.
it's information gathering. All the things you thought that were so important that happened in your life between, birth and 40. Sorry to point it out. I'm glad you're doing it. They're important stepping stones. You're gathering information for the second half of life.
Yep.
And this is where it really gets exciting. And
Yes.
I think we got to get rid of this notion that somehow we have an expiration date and that
Yes.
because we're aging, all the best years are behind us. Like that's
Yep.
complete rubbish. And so, I'm about let's celebrate those breakthroughs that people are having. I love to hear those stories of people pushing through the human condition, this common thread of like, what do I want to have in my life? And again, I think it goes back to we all want very simple things, but we are going to achieve it different ways.
Mhm.
We all want to feel free.
Mhm.
We all want to feel at peace, and
Mhm.
we all want to feel loved, whether it's
Yep.
in the mountains, whether it's because you write your book, whether it's because you launch a podcast, whether it's because you start a business, whether you meet the love of your life, you start traveling, you continue traveling, whatever those things are, whether it's just sitting down and recognizing that the people sitting across from you that you have developed relationships with are your best friends. And you
Mm.
get to sit down and have really nice conversations about life and
Yeah.
what matters
Right.
over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or what have you
Yep.
with people who are on that same vibration as you. It doesn't get better than that.
No, those deep conversations and things that really bring the meaning of life home they're priceless.
That to me is if you get there, you've arrived. And
Yeah.
the idea for me is how do you keep it going? Stay
Yeah.
in that state of alignment because
Right.
I want more. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean bad things aren't going to happen, but
Right.
gosh, to be able to have these breakthroughs and realize that we are so fortunate,
Yeah.
and to then realize that all of the darkness or heaviness that may have preceded in life, as it, did for me early on, I feel profound joy.
Yeah.
Does not mean negative things are not occurring. It just means I still am coming at it from a place of pervasive joy. I can meet the obstacle. I can meet the negative news, the sad and tragic circumstances that happen around me and
Hmm.
even to me in a different vibrational state. It doesn't impact me the way it would have probably thrown me for a loop 20 years ago. I recognize it
Yeah.
as part of the human condition. It's part of what we live. I grieve whatever I need to grieve. I mourn if I need to mourn. I just don't stay there. The
Yeah.
important part, I think, is you don't want to stay stuck. You can get
Right.
to a place, and I don't deny anybody feel your feelings, feel them deeply, but just don't let them pull you under. Don't
Yeah.
stay in that low vibration and miss out
Yeah.
what there is out there to live, because there's so much
Yes.
more. We all have this common human condition that we're going through, and
Yeah.
all these variety of experiences that we have, whether or not we've experienced them, we can empathize with, we can learn from and grow from, and we can be inspired by them to
Exactly.
go and live our best lives. It's never
That's
too
right.
late. And, I feel like we're just getting started.
We're just getting started. Thinking of how you're going to set the tone for your next year ahead.
Yes.
What is a one word that you could use as a theme or an inspirational word for the next year? And mine was rebirth.
Ooh, I love that. I say reinvention, but I've already feel like I've gone through a lot of reinvention. So it's probably not the right word. The word for me is to be in probably be in a state of receipt, like
Ah,
receiving.
yeah.
I think again, like what you put out in the world is what you're going to get back. And
Yeah.
so if you subscribe to that, I'm really spent a lot of time putting a lot of good out there on
Yes.
purpose. Like, because at the
Yeah.
ultimate day, I'm still a human and I want to get it
Yeah.
all back and then fold.
Yeah.
I want to
Sure.
feel the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think once you realize that that's how the world works, you give it all away.
Absolutely. It's all about giving and then you're automatically going to receive and it will just be this flow, this constant flow. It's really magical. Oh my
Exactly.
gosh. Well, I'm so excited to hear the stories that you bring out to the world with your
Thank
podcast.
you.
It's so amazing. And I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and open hearted in sharing your story. It's been just wonderful to hear.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for having me on. I think what you're doing is incredibly healing and incredibly important. And I just really commend you for coming up with this idea. It's such a phenomenal concept. And I hope more people will want to come on and tell their stories,
Yeah,
because I think we all have a story to tell. That's the
we
great
do.
thing. Everybody has a story.
Yes, we do.